Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next bit of our rather innovative Shabbat GG, which is conducting entirely not on Shabbos and online, and there's some good bits to bin and good bits to come. It's a pleasure to invite back our friend Rabbi Dr. Rafi Zarum, who is the Dean of the London School of Jewish Studies, an old friend, spoken in our community many times in the past. And Rafi, it was planned that he would come and join us as a guest speaker on Shabbos. In the end, we're not meeting, and this is a better forum. And there's an opportunity to hear his probably a longer talk than he would have been able to give in shul. Rafi is an old friend. We continue to do many projects together. I'm always amazed by the kind of breadth and creativity of the stuff that he and the college are turning out. I remain associated with the college, although in a more occasional advisory capacity these days. Rafi is currently working on a slightly secret, rather exciting project, which I'm sort of helping with him in the background. I can't give you any more details unless he wishes, but it's going to be great, and it's going to be some while before it appears, but watch out because it's going to be really good. Okay, Rafi, over to you. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to suggest that everyone mutes themselves and then do unmute yourself if you have a question. Rafi, would you prefer questions in the middle or only at the end?
I'll take it. I'll see as I go. If people want to ask questions, they can raise their hands. Okay. Do you want to raise your hand? Yeah, you can either do it physically, or you can actually press the little thing on the bottom. See that little smiley on the bottom? If you click on that like that, see, I've just raised my hand like that.
So please mute yourselves, and then and then unmute yourself if you have something specific to say if invited.
Or write in the chat or whatever. So good to see all of you, and thank you for Rabbi Belovsky. I really like working with your rabbi, as you know, and he's helping me a lot in my writing and all different kinds of things. And we got on great, which is fantastic. And he asked me to give a shiur tonight. I suggest doing a shiur tonight, slightly longer than a sermon, but it's one central idea. I've got a handout which I'll email to the Rav afterwards, and he can send it out to you. But it's all based on something that I read of Rabbi Sacks years ago, and I remember how radical it was then. And then when I tried to find it in his writings, I couldn't. And I found it in a much later writing. I still haven't found the original one. I think it's one of the most radical midrashim I ever saw from him. And I thought to investigate all the different versions of it to see what it means. And it's really fascinating. It involves a floating palace, as I'll show you, and the dependency of God on us. We normally imagine God as independent, right? If there was no world, there'd still be God. Whereas if there's no God, there'd be no world. And if there's no people, there'd still be God. But if there's a God, there can still be no people. But we're going to see these sources seem to say something different, that actually there's a huge dependence between God and the Jewish people. And it's a long midrash, and it employs 7 different verses from all over the Bible. So what I've realized in teaching this is if I go through the verses first and you get a feel for them, and I hint to what the issue is, then when you read the midrash, you'll find it much easier to follow. And that's what we're going to do. And that way you can challenge me and ask questions about it as we go. So that's the idea. I'm going to give you a beautiful image of a floating palace. This is not the floating palace, which if you look up on the internet is in Jaipur. That's actually an island in the middle of a sea. I'm talking about a proper floating palace, which is the metaphor for Jewish life, as you will see. So let me share with you the handout. You get a feel for it. Here we go. A floating palace. Here it is over here. And I've got you down the side. I'm going to go through these verses, as I told you, and then start explaining the midrash. And as I read the verses, you'll get a feel for them. So look, at the moment, it's just 7 different verses from all over. But when we piece them together, they start me. Oh, sorry about the numbering. I didn't read you the numbering. There are 7. Ignore my repeated numbering. So we'll go through. Okay. So the first one is in Devarim. And this is actually near the end of the Torah in the Zot HaBracha. And we're talking about God, and we're talking about the future. And say, "Vahi b'Yeshua and Melech b'hit asef," and God will be the king in Yeshua, and that means amongst the Jewish people. B'hit asef, when they are gathered together, right? When we gather together, God is the king. V'shei am yachad shiftei Yisrael, the heads of the people and the heads of the people and the tribes of Israel when they gather together. Now, what the Midrash is going to do is make a causal link between each half of the verse each time. So it says, and God is king in Yeshua when they gather together. God is the king when they are gathered together. Ergo, if they're not gathered together, then God is not king in Yeshua. Do you see that? You could read it that way. God is king in Yeshua when they are gathered together. But if they're not gathered, then he's not king. Question mark. Is that the case? That's a bit weird. Let's look at the next one. Now, the verse in Amos is used in a slightly different way. We'll just read it because he does refer to it. It's talking about Haboneh b'shamayim ma'alotav va'agudato al eret yisada. It is God who built in the heavens his heights. So God built in the heavens. Make sure you're on silent. God built in the heavens his height. In other words, he built all the heavens. Va'agudato al eret yisada, and his bond on the earth was established. Our God is kind of tying together. So a kind of bonded structure on the earth. He builds in the heavens and he's got a bond on earth. It is God who calls the waters of the sea and pours them on the earth. That is God. So there's a connection between heaven and earth. We'll come back to the Amos in a minute. Now we're getting to last week's Edra.
Give us a shout if you need help. What? Give me a shout if you need help.
There we go. I'm going to mute some of you guys, if that's okay. There we go. I have the power. There we go. If you need help, just put your hand up. There we go. Now look at source 3. Source 3 is last week's Edra, when Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea, right? That great song that the people sang with Moses. Azi v'zimratya. This is my strength. V'zimratya. This is the Lord of my strength and song. Vahili lishuan. God is my salvation. Zeh keli ve'anvehu. This is my God. There's a few translations, and I will beautify God. Na'er, from Na'er. This is my God, and I'll beautify him. Elokei aviva mehu, the God of my father, I'll exalt him. Now it says, Zeh keli v'anvehu, this is my God, and I beautify him. So again, the Midrash is going to play the question, and if I don't beautify him, is he not my God? Can you see that? I'm giving you away the Midrash because you'll follow it much better. It sounds shocking to read it that way, but you'll see that's what the Midrash does. Next one. For Deuteronomy, same idea. Kishem Hashem ekra, I'll proclaim the name of God. Havu God Elokeinu, and I'll ascribe greatness to God. And so if I don't ascribe greatness to God, is God not proclaimed? Always playing it backwards. Again, another in Isaiah, because the rabbis quote all over. There's a verse in Isaiah talking about the Jewish people and God. Anochi, higadati, v'oshati, v'shmati, v'ein bachem zah. I've declared and saved and proclaimed, and there's no strange one or strange God amongst you. V'atem eidai, and you are my witnesses, Num Hashem, right, says God. V'ani kel, and I am God. Look at that. You are my witnesses, and I am God. Now, who wants to suggest what the way the Midrash might read that verse? You are my witnesses, and I am God. What's the converse of that? Anybody want to try and suggest? Either type it in or unmute.
If there are no witnesses, you're not God.
Right. If you are not my witnesses, then I'm not God. What? What? How can you say that? God forbid. Right? But let's see what the Midrash does. Well noticed. Good. Now, next one in Psalms. Let's see if you get the hang of it in the last one. Right? Shir Ma'alot, a song of ascents. Elecha nasati et einai. To you I lift up, I raise my eyes. Hayoshvi b'shamayim, who dwells in the heavens. Right? I lift up my eyes, and you dwell in the heavens. What do you think the Midrash says on that? Someone else want to have a go? What's the converse then?
Well, if I don't lift up my eyes, you don't dwell in the heavens.
Right, Peter, exactly. And if I don't look up, you're not there. So you know that classic, if a branch breaks in a tree in a forest and no one's there to hear it, did it make a sound? If no one looks up at God, is God there? So, well, of course God's there. You've got to notice God, but God's always there. But with the verse, it seems to be, is it related? So now we're ready with all these verses up our sleeve to follow the Midrash. Okay, there's a Midrash Sifrei, and it's got the beautiful image of the floating palace, and then we bring all our verses. And in a way, we're just going to study. There's two other versions of this Midrash to understand what it means. If in our lives we can just understand one text in all its depth and really appreciate it, that's when Jewish learning really begins. So what happens? We begin with that phrase, Yachad Shiftei Yisrael. The tribe of Israel are gathered together. Kashem osim aguda achat. That's when you constitute one unit. The law, kashem osim agudot, but not when you're divided into many factions. As it says, who builds in the heavens his heights, and his bond connected together on earth. So it seems God we're only one unit. We gather together. We don't have many factions. I don't know if there's any time in Jewish history when the Jews didn't argue with each other and they were in factions, agudot. But the idea is that when we gather together, it works. And what's the metaphor Rav Shimon gives here? Mashal adam shevi shtei sfinot v'koshrim oragim v'ashtot v'emidim al gabehem ubaneh lehem paltirin. So what's it saying? Imagine a whole bunch of ships and they gather together with braces and bars. We're getting lots of nice nautical imagery here. And we tie and strap together a whole bunch of ships in one. And we build palaces on them. Imagine building a city, a royal palace city on top of these boats that are tied together. As long as the ships are, the image is so powerful, right? Because they're floating in the water all together, and this palace is floating. All the time that the boats are koshrot, are tied tightly together, paltrin karmim, the palace or the palaces stand. Parshus finot, when the boats start moving apart and separating, paltrin karmim, the palaces literally don't endure, they fall apart. What a wonderful image for Jewish life. When we tie it together, it's built literally on our backs as a unified people. But when we start drawing apart, when you leave the community, or you separate the community, you might think, oh, the community is still there, I've just gone away. No, it begins to teeter. Imagine all of us holding, and your shul is a grand classic. Imagine it's all of you, the hundreds of members of Golders Green who hold your shul. Imagine if 10 people walk away and the other 100 go, hang on, this is getting really heavy, I can't hold. It starts to wobble. It's on all of our shoulders together. And we're strapped together, when we're tied together, Yachad Shiftei Yisrael, we're grouped together. When the bonds between us fall apart, then the bonds of the palace, which reaches up to God, falls apart. And that's why the Amos, who built in the heavens, were the bond on earth. If the bond on earth, if the tying together of the ships on earth falls apart, we disconnect from the heavens. And we disconnect from God. So a wonderful image of the connection between the tied together Jewish people and then God. So that's the building blocks. And now we build ideas on it. Look what it says. Right, Kach Yisrael, Kashim Ratzon Shamakom. So it is with Israel when they do it with the will of God. Altehem Bashamayim, then their heights is in the heavens, and when they don't, they're connected to the heavens, and when they don't do the will of God, then their bond is on the earth, established, but it doesn't reach up to the heavens again. So something falls apart when we don't do the right thing. Now look at version C. It explains this with another verse. The next verse we're going to do. It's similar to the phrase we had in the Song at the Sea. This is my God. I put, and I've praised him, but I've also translated as, this is my God and I'll beautify him. Now look what it says here. It's so shocking. I've got to read you in the Hebrew clearly. Can you see? Ka'asha'ani modelo. When I acknowledge God, hu na'eh, God is beautiful. Or ka'sha'enani modelo. And when I don't recognize him, I don't admit him or thank him, kivyachol, it's as if b'shmo hu na'eh. It's as if, now this is weird, it should be, it's as if he's not beautiful, but it says, hu bishmo hu na'eh. It should say, hu lo na'eh, he's not. But here's the point here, this is called euphemistic language. Bishmo is a name. Bishmo is saying, I don't want to say what I'm implying here, that God isn't beautiful. So I just use the word bishmo. Okay, it's an avoidance of saying what I really mean. This happens sometimes with the rabbis, they do euphemism. When they're talking about cursing God, instead of using the word klala, they'll use the word bracha. Right? Hu barech, he blessed God, but it means he cursed God. So here it means when I admit God, he's beautiful, and when I don't admit God, it's as if he's hu lo na'eh, he's not beautiful. But the Midrash, and this is interesting in the style, it's such a shocking idea to imply that God isn't something beautiful and wonderful, that the Midrash can't even say it. At this point anyway, it can't even say it. So I'm trying to show you there's a connection between the idea it's saying and the shock of saying it. Sometimes ideas you're not willing to say in public, not just because you're scared that other people will hear you say them, but you don't want to say them to yourself. Psychologically, the things we don't admit to ourselves. So the Midrash doesn't even want to say kivyachol, as if, that is. Kivyachol means as if, it's not there. You'll see this idea carries on in the next version of it. In D, we're using another verse. Look at this. It says, Kishem Hashem ekra, havagod alakeinu. As we said, for I proclaim the name of God, ascribe greatness. Kasha'ani koreh bishmo. When I call in God's name, hu gadol, he is great. Ve'im lav, and if I don't, kivyachol, it's as if, and v'cho means ... Again, the Midrash doesn't do a euphemism this time. It goes to say, and if not, ve'im lav, and if not, it's as if, and what's as if? He's not great. So the Midrash now, it made up a euphemism last time. Now it's a bit more willing to admit it, but doesn't go all the way. And in the next one, he'll get more confident. You'll see this. As he writes this, he's building up the idea. I'm trying to dramatize this Midrash for you. So when he first says it, he says, and if God isn't, and if when I recognize God, God is beautiful, and when I don't recognize God, God is beautiful. But I can't admit what I mean by that. This time around, I go a bit further. When I proclaim God, he's great, and when I don't proclaim God, then he's not. Right? But him love, and if not, it's as if ... and I put in brackets, he's not great, but that's not in the Midrash. God forbid you should say that. The next one, simile, kutsebo, simile. It says in Isaiah, Va'atem edai nun Hashem, you are my witnesses, Va'ani kel, and I am God. Now finally, the Midrash writer, Rabbi Yishmael Yochai, is willing to admit it. Kashe'atem edai, when you are my witnesses, ani kel, I am God. Or kashe'ein atem adai, and when you are not my witnesses, kivyachol, it's as if ein ani kel, I am not God. Now he's finally said it. Can you see the first two times he was a bit nervous, apprehensive to say it. Now he's actually said it. My goodness. Yeah.
Take the gloves away. Take them off you.
Are you asking a question, or do you want to mute? Or you're just side issues? Okay, no problem. So you see the idea here. It's a really shocking idea. It's as if God is not a God. If God hasn't got any witnesses, then God is not God. Really? Can we actually say that? Look at F, it continues. Oh, sorry, it jumps back here. Let's carry on. Where were we? We were just over here. Right, we did E. Look at F. Similarly, it says, Elecha nasati elenai. Remember, I lift up my eyes to you, right? Hoshavni bashamayim, right? Who dwells in the heavens. Now, this is really interesting the way it translates it. Ilmale ani kivyachol lo hayiti yoshev bashamayim. Now, this is a really weird play on words here. What it should say, if I did lift up my eyes, then you would not be in the heavens. That's what it should be. But it makes it even more personal. It says, Ilmale ani, if it wasn't for I. Now, is that I referring to me, to God or Israel? But it's referring to I, me, meaning I, Israel. If I, me, well, if Ilmale ani can mean if it wasn't for me, or it wasn't for I. So if it wasn't for the I, my knowledge of self, looking up to the heavens, kivyachel, lo hayiti, it would be as if God doesn't dwell in the heavens, but hayiti means that I wouldn't dwell in the heavens. Why? Because what it's doing is identifying the I of God and the I of you. Do you get that? So if not for I, then the I is not in the heavens. So the I of the human being and the I of God are connected. What it should say is, Ilmale ani kivyachol lo yoshev b'shmaim, then God isn't in the heavens. But no, if I don't look up, then the I of God is not in the heavens. So each time the writer of the Midrash is getting more bold and connecting more with God and being able to say the connection. At first, it was saying, I can't even admit that if I didn't respect God, God wouldn't be there. Of course, God is. And then it says, and then he's willing to admit it. And now he even identifies his name with God as well. And now finally, at the end of the Midrash, we come back to the original idea of together Israel. That was the first thing he quoted. Av kanhu, so similarly, Yachad Shifte Yisrael. Kashem osim agada achat, when you make one joint bond, v'lo kashem osim agudot, and not when you break up. So God is only a king when Yeshua all joined together. And so I've got in the notes here a summary of all the ideas that I've done here. Go from A to G, and there's a building up. Okay. The reason I put like a fiddler on the roof, by the way, you might like that, is because that issue of that floating palace. Remember that bit at the opening of the musical Fiddler on the Roof? He says, our lives are precarious. We try and balance our traditions, and it's really difficult to. And our traditions are as dangerous, are as scary as a fiddler on the roof, trying to play out a tune without falling off and breaking his neck. And that's what the floating palace is. We're trying to hold it all together, our faith, through all being unified together. That's how it starts. And then we do all these comparisons. It's as if, one after the other. It's incredible. The Midrash is about the dependence of God's presence in the world on the Jewish people. If you want to be really extreme, you could even imply God's existence. If there's no one to know about God, then in what sense is there God? I've got a thing in the chat over here. A shaky, that's right. Our lives were shaky, that's the word name. Our lives were shaky, as shaky as a fiddle on the roof. Thank you.
But Rafi, is not all this talking about the perception of God from our point of view? I mean, nowhere is there saying that there is no God and he didn't create the world.
Right.
We're not saying
So Brian is immediately,
objectively.
Brian, you're excellent. You're immediately reeling back and saying it must be about his presence in the world. But look at the one over here, right? Kashe'atem adai, when you're my witnesses, I am God, right? Or kashe'atem, when you're not witnesses, kivyachol, I am not God. It's as if I'm not God. It doesn't say it's as if I'm not God in the world. It says as if I'm not God. So I agree with you. Philosophically, it would be completely wrong to say God's existence is dependent on us. I agree. But how about God's manifestation in the world? And Brian, let's be honest, all that we know about God is God's manifestation in the world.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right.
So if we sever the link between heaven and earth, then effectively there's no God. There might as well be, or there might as well not be. Kivyachol. But
is that not the reverse of what is repeatedly said, that basically if you do not observe my mitzvot, then I won't be your God. I won't look after you.
But that's different. That's about God hiding God's face or God walking away. That's a different issue. That's about other nations will still respect God and that kind of stuff. But this is more. God's not saying I won't have a relationship with you, but I won't be in this earth at all. My existence in this earth, you are my witnesses on the earth. The Jewish people are the proof of God on earth. If we weren't there, what next? Would there still be recognition of God? Would people get to that anymore? It's a huge burden upon us. We used to think that God is God and we are us, so our job is to be close to God, and either way God's there. But now we have a much larger weight on our shoulders of this palace, that if we shirk it, then there is no knowledge of God in the world. Maybe God even can't make it through the gate into earth. There's no connections anymore. I'll give you two more examples and I will take questions. I want to give lots of time for questions. And there's two more versions of the Midrash and you'll see it more strongly. This is in the Pesik Ded Rav Kahana, another Midrash. It's again quoting that verse from Isaiah, and it ends up in the same place, but it goes along. Remember that verse? I've declared and I've saved and proclaimed, and there's strange among you that you're my witnesses and I'm God. And the implication had been, if you weren't my witnesses, I'd not be God. Look what it says. Anihi gadati, I've declared. That's like Haggadah. When did God declare his connection? In Egypt. God made a connection with us. I bring us out of Egypt. And then Voshati, and I saved you by Yam, on the crossing of the sea. That's when God looked after us and made a connection. Vashamatin, you heard me this week Sedra at Mount Sinai. For Imachem there was no a stranger there. That's Jethro, Yitro, who went away. And after all those things, right, because you came out of Egypt, because you crossed the sea, because you had revelation at Mount Sinai, then you are my witnesses. Imatemadai, and if you become my witnesses because of all these things, then I'm God. And if you don't, it's as if I'm not God. And that's why in the story of the Exodus and Revelation at Mount Sinai are fundamental ideas that we believe. Right? Well, historically, why? Because those events are when we were witnesses of God, and we've been passing that down on from parent to child for generations. And that's what makes God on earth. And if we stop being witnesses to that, all those phrases, then God is no longer in this earth, God. Okay? So Saul's asking existentialism before Sartre. It's very interesting. It really is existential in such a fundamental way. You're absolutely right, Saul. I mean, I call it in some ways humanist in that way, right? The existence of God on earth is contingent on human beings. It's not that we make God, we are somehow that connection. It's a very powerful idea. Again, one more version of it, and then I'll show you how Rabbi Sacks describes it, right? Mechol Tzedach Shimon, he says, the God of my father, I'll beautify him. He says, when Israel does the will of God, his name is great in the world. When he does not do with the will of God, his name is profaned in the world. This is the idea of Chilul and Kiddush Hashem. So this is less existential now about God's existence. This is about God's name in the world. But then again, what is God's name? God's image is literally what people know about God. And if there's no Jews to proclaim it, then it's gone. I don't know if any of you are fans of Terry Pratchett and Discworld. There's lots of great philosophy in there. But there's one about these people who live on the side of a disc on a whole bunch of elephants. But there's one book called Small Gods. And the idea is that the less people believe in some of the gods, the smaller they get. And if people stop believing in certain gods, they disappear altogether. And lahavdil, historically, that's what happened in pagan idolatrous cultures. They had multiple gods in local areas and then general gods. And if people stopped worshipping one of the local gods, the god died out. The existence of a divine is dependent on those, in terms of recognition of the world, God, those who praise them. But we take this much more, the Midrash takes this in a much more fundamental way, because we don't need to do idolatry, all this kind of stuff. Our relationship with God is different. It's the historical connection of Exodus and revelation at Mount Sinai. Now look at how Rabbi Sacks sums it up. And I still haven't found the earlier version of it, because I think in the earlier version, he pushed it even further. But look at this, look what he says. He almost says it, just like the Kivyachol, he literally mirrors the Midrash. He says, God is God, just as you said, Brian, whatever we do or fail to do. But God, having set his image on every human being, took the risk, look at that, took the risk of identifying his presence in history with one small people whom he made a covenant in a lonely desert long ago. And that fact has charged Jewish existence with immense responsibility ever since. How the people of God behaves affects how God himself is perceived. So, of course, he establishes very clearly in his book, God's God no matter what. But then he says, God took the risk and said, but you know what? I'm going to put my entire PR budget into the Jewish people. You own the budget completely. If you squander that, if you don't represent me on earth, then I've got no PR and I'm unknown, and God becomes an unknown God. So that's an incredible idea. And that's why I began with the title of the class, and I'll take your questions, of a floating palace, right? That palace is the beautiful way that we conduct our religious Jewish lives. We as people are the boats all tied together, and on top of it, we can build community. We can do chesed for each other. We can pray together and sing more beautifully. We can learn together and gain ideas from each other and grow this incredible palace. When we drift apart and we're not connected and we don't look up, the whole palace comes crashing down. The connection between heaven and earth is God, and it's as if there is no God, the Kivyachol, and what it means in Rabbi Sacks' terms is that God's presence on earth is gone, as it were. His presence in history and the knowledge of God on earth is gone. And that's the idea of the floating palace. And I remember when I read it the first time in an earlier book, which I'm still trying to find where it said, I remember how shocked I was that, because I always felt, well, it doesn't really matter what I do. But now the whole weight of this palace, or one part of it, is on my shoulders. So, comments, what do you think of that? Let me stop the share so I can see you all. What are your thoughts when you read that text? What springs up at you? Who wants to speak first?
Can I say something?
Pardon?
Sorry,
Who's speaking?
Jackie Crossley. Is it
One
possible
at
to
a
say
time,
something?
please.
So Jack, you go first. Go on.
I met Jonathan Sacks actually, because he lives near me in the park one day. He put me right, and I won't go to what he said. But I said to him, do you think Hashem hardened Pharaoh's heart so that it would take a long time, and eventually when they got out of Egypt, they would always remember who helped them to get out in the sea? If they'd have got out on the first attempt or the second attempt, it wouldn't have been as powerful. He actually put me right on Egyptian mythology and why Hashem hardened his heart. But
Right,
nonetheless, I always had this wonder. He said, no, he wouldn't have done that because they were ungrateful from the moment they got across the other side.
Yes,
But,
that's true.
Yeah,
It's true. But it is true.
thought.
It is true. I've been to your house many times, Jackie. I'm a friend of Emma's.
Oh, right, okay.
Yes, I've been to your house many times. No, but it is definitely true that, we remember the difficulties of our relationships. That's definitely true. It increases the bond.
Yes.
It's an amazing thing that 3,000 years after God did that with us, we still talk about it on Seder night.
Exactly.
Talk about what was it like? What does it mean? We're still asking those questions. That's a lot. That's a pretty good relationship. 3,500 years. That's longer than most relationships today, right?
Yeah.
So we celebrate that, absolutely. But it's that bond. Other comments or questions?
Please.
Yes, Jack.
Yeah.
Jack's iPad.
Two
funny
things.
the name, but go on.
It's a double statement. One is Suli, free will comes into this, and God's ability of giving us free will, but also his knowledge of the future.
Mm-hmm.
How do you reconcile both of those with the floating palace?
Well, yeah. So, I can easily, Jackie, while standing on one leg, Jack, solve the issue of providence and free choice. So I've got my legs crossed, only one on the floor, so I can definitely do that. But it's interesting. I mean, it's scandalous that God gave us free choice, because we can just walk away. The whole point of it's floating, and I love the image because floating always means it's moving, right? It's never standing still. We're constantly floating on a bed of water. We can drown. We've got to float. Remember, the boat has to be firm ourselves. For me, that's about our psychology. If we're grounded, we can float. If we start splashing about and our psychology isn't strong, then we drown, and the palace on top of us drowns as well. So every moment we have a choice to be there or not. Now, you know what? I don't really care if God knows what we're going to choose. I've always thought of it in that way. I mean, people get obsessed. Do we have free choice or not? I'm like, if you truly believe we have it, that means that everything we do has infinite significance. Okay, so I'm not going to give you some clever answers of how providence works and free choice. I want you to focus from a humanistic point of view of what it means to truly have choice. That means every decision you make that you really made is yours, and every rejection you made is your fault. And every waste of time that you do is your waste, because nothing forced you to do it, Jack.
Yeah, but that's the individual. But that's why I said, but God sees the future. So one is for the individual and the other one is for the people. Is that?
Could be. Some people argue providence works on a national group level, not an individual level. Again, I don't like getting into all those different philosophical arguments, because I'm concerned from the point of view of earth looking up, not God looking down. I think God can sort out God, right? You know what Elie Wiesel's uncle said to him just before he walked off into the camps? He said to him, "You're a Jew. Your job is to remain a Jew. The rest is up to God. You know, let God worry about God stuff. God's been around for a long time. I'm not worried about God. I'm worried about my point of view. Given my free choice, what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with this infinite potential that my mind and my body has? What am I going to do this? Am I going to waste it and just muck around, or do something worthwhile? Read more, eat more beautiful food, see more beautiful objects, read brilliant ideas, have deeper relationships, understand God in a deeper way. That's what I want. So I'm more obsessed with the consequences of choice rather than the question of choice. Do you get that? It's a choice. Other comments or questions? Yes, Ruth. You want to unmute, or shall I mute you?
I'm done it.
You're muted.
I find that very scary.
Yeah.
Because if I've understood you correctly, we have to work together to enhance the presence of God.
Yes.
And we don't.
We don't. But
what
Ruth,
does that mean?
Isn't it true? It's true, but isn't it true, Ruth? When we do good things as a people,
you know, you're going to make me cry. It's really scary.
No, but it's beautiful when the state of Israel leads the world in vaccinating, right, or going to other countries and helping. People say, "Oh, Jews, God's image is greater in the world." And when we do stupid things without mentioning anything, right? When Jews do stupid things or look bad in the press, not only I don't feel bad for myself. I just think, you know, I don't say. Some people think, "Oh, those Jews have done bad things. Oh, it makes me look bad." I don't care about me looking bad. You know what I care? It makes God look bad. Someone was telling me this today. The sad thing when Jews muck around, right, and do stupid things is not that we're embarrassed that people say, "Are you like that as well?" Much worse, the image of God. I mean, the word, Ruth, the name of a Jew in Hebrew is Yehudi, right? From Yehuda. It's literally got God's name in it. Yehuda, you know, Jews is really Judeans from the word Yehuda. I'll write it on a piece of paper, the word Yehuda, I'll hold it up. But Yehuda is spelt Yud, Hey, Vav, Yehuda, Vav, Daled, Hey, right? If you take out that Daled, what have you got? Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. God's name. God's name is in the word Jew. Jew means God plus Daled. And the Daled is quite cool because the Daled is actually a 4, which is the 4 letters. So we're not Jews. We're images of God on the earth. And we muck it up. We muck up God's image, Ruth. It's a huge responsibility, but a huge opportunity, though. Right? I mean, that's why I remember when I was a kid, you know, we always, you know, as a Jew in public, as for men wearing kippot, I've got to be nice. I never forget, I'll tell a story that I can tell this because it was a friend of mine who was worked with Eish Torah. The Eish rabbis were all bought once these special cars. It was a present from a guy who unlocked their car sales. He bought a whole bunch of cars and they put Eish on the side of the cars. All right, 3 cars for all the Eish rabbis, wonderful. I spoke to one Eish rabbi, he goes, "Oh, it's terrible." I said, "Why?" He goes, "I can't double park. I can't speed. I can't beep. I've got to drive perfectly because if I do one bad thing, everyone thinks Eish rabbis, look how they drive." It's amazing, but that's the point. That's the point, right? It kind of makes us be good. It makes us be conscious of that. So it is an awesome responsibility. But if you really see it in that way, and that's why I love the Rabbi Sacks, he said he took a risk. God took a risk on you and me. Are we going to live up to the risk? Are we going to say it was worth the risk? But it is a weighty thing, Ruth. But the Midrash is radical at one point and also very empowering at the same time as well. That's why I love it so much.
Yeah, he's still hurting because I was need.
Other comments or questions?
I'm just Rafi. I'm just going to say I don't believe this is personal. I'm just going to say my surname is Bronzite, so I think you know who I am.
Oh, cool. Oh, I think. Oh, wonderful Bronzite. Lovely to see you. I love all Bronzites everywhere as well up north. Thank you.
So Rafi, I would like to ask a question, if that's okay.
You rather than Peter. Go on, go, Rav.
So the this midrash flies in the face of let's say the way the Rambam sees the world. The Rambam is absolutely obsessed with the impossibility of God being contingent on anything in any way at all. Now, to some degree, Brian has tackled this by saying, well, this is from a certain perspective, but it's not an existential perspective, it's a relative perspective. This entire midrashic construct is saying this is the way human beings experience God. It's not saying anything existential. And if you look, for example, in the writings of Chaim Volozhiner, he used the typology mitzido, mitzidenu, means there's a perspective from God's perspective and there's our perspective. And they can be completely different without violating any core philosophical principles. But these midrashim, and particularly the way that you've read them based on Rabbi Sacks' writings, would be very, very challenging indeed for the Maimonidean perspective, who believes that it's absolute heresy, perhaps the worst type of heresy, to suggest that God has any shared characteristics with humanity, or that he could be in any way contingent on anything whatever, certainly human approval. How would you tackle that question if someone asked it in a shiur?
Yeah. Well, someone just did. Well, look, first of all, that's why what's the key word repeated over and over again? Kivyachol. Kivyachol. It's as if. Right? Kivyachol. Right? Kivyachol. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean it's as if I'm afraid to say it because it's so true? Or kivyachol, I don't really mean it, but I mean it existentially? You could read in all that kind of way. But the way I see it is, if we have God up there, metaphorically, and us down here, Maimonides tries to bring us up to God. This midrash brings God down to us, but the amount of motion is the same. So it's as you said, it's definitely to do with perspective. Now, I'm a Maimonidean, right? I'm a rationalist. My father's a Yemenite Jew, and the Yemenites include Maimonides in their Kaddish. So I'm very Maimonidean. But for me, Maimonides describes reality. But description is different from action. He's describing this is the way the world is. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And that's where things change. In Chassidut, Rav, from what I learned, I only know a basic Chassidut, but it's the Ratzoi V'Shov aspect of it. So Maimonides says, God's here, and these are the angels. This is the structure of reality. Well, the Chassidim go, yeah, fine. Here's how you move around. Here's how you can come close to God and move around in that relationship. And therefore, it is from our point of view. So Rabbi Sacks reasserts in his opening line by saying, God's definitely God no matter what. And we say it by the Kivyachol. But what I think I find powerful is it in a way, it achieves what Maimonides wants. Maimonides wants us to live much more with God in our lives. And if I sit here and give a beautiful philosophical description of Maimonidean ideas, we'll all be lost. But when we do this midrash, Ruth is worried. Why? Because the weight of God is coming on earth with her. She's getting it. So the midrash achieves what Maimonides wants, but in a different kind of way. Do you see what I'm saying here? Maimonides wants us to live godly with God in our lives. And this achieves it, but not in the way Maimonides describes it. So that's right. But it's an educationist as opposed to philosopher.
This kind of Hasidic attempt to synthesize the experience of God and the reality of God was strongly rejected by the Yemenite teachers as a corruption of Maimonides philosophy.
I'll give you complete honest with
you
you guys.
Can look at the lives of Yichya, but I'm not going to hog the floor. We'll talk about that.
No, but I'll tell you a lovely story, guys. I'll tell you a lovely story.
Yes.
A really good friend of mine, I know the Rav knows him, is a guy called Matthew Weiniger. Right? Very, is a good guy. He's very successful. He loves Hasidus. He just learns Hasidus all day long, right? When he's not working. And in shul, I'd always say my ideas, and he'd say, I said, Matthew, Thursday nights, come to my house teach Hasidus. And I got a whole bunch of rationists, all of us geeky rationists, right, to come around together, and we learned Hasidus with him, right? And at the first, we were going, no, not sure. And eventually, obviously, there's a bit of whiskey as well, and it's men and women. And the more we did it, the more we realize how exciting this is. Rationalism only takes you so far. And I love this about Rabbi Sacks, by the way. You know, he's very much Maimonidean. But you read his Machzor, it's got brilliant philosophical ideas. Once he gets to the heart of prayer, Unatana Tokef, you look at the Machzor, it's all Hasidic stories. Once he gets to the heart, he goes all Hasidic at that point. And that's what my Thursday nights with Matthew have been, which is that we realize that Hasidism allows us to connect to that incredible rational God. Peter, you've got your hand raised.
Well, I was going to ask you about this phrase you just talked about, as if.
Yes.
Because it seems to me that what this is really about is about obligation. And it's making the point that, and it's a sort of obvious point, I suppose, but that the obligation flows two ways. In that, you know, we talk about the covenant that God made with us, but it isn't always clear exactly what our obligations in relation to same were. And what this is saying is that if we don't do our bit, then it is as if God isn't there, in the sense that the relationship with us is damaged. And it almost opens the point of saying that if we don't do what we should do, then it takes God to the point where he's free to enter into a covenant with somebody else.
Right. But God's never do. But it's a very good point. I mean, if you think about the metaphor of relationships, you know, God forbid when a parent rejects a child or vice versa, what you say, you are dead to me, or that classic Jewish line, or you are nothing to me. You don't exist. We say that about a person. Well, of course they exist, but to me, they don't. You write them out their will, or God forbid a relationship, a marriage breaks down. And there's
but it's exactly the same phrase. It is as if you are dead. Exactly.
And it's a very powerful line when you say it to someone. You're nothing to me. You don't exist to me. That's really shocking because it's broken the relationship. But I agree with you, Brian. The whole point of a covenant with God, a real covenant, has to be equal parts. And how can we be equal to God? It's impossible. How can we possibly be equal to God? But because we're physical and we're on earth, we are. Because we are the ambassadors of God on earth. And if there's no ambassadors, there's no connection.
Yes, but I don't understand where you get the concept of equality from.
From covenant, from the idea of Brit. It has to be equal.
No. But that doesn't mean equality.
Why not?
I mean, it just means that there is a level of obligation on both sides. But it doesn't have to be equal. And therefore, I don't see anything in what you've said that takes me to the sense that we are equal to, or in any sense comparable to.
Excellent.
But
Peter, I'm getting it from the Midrash.
But I don't think you are. I don't think you're getting equality.
Oh, so
what you're getting is relationship.
No, but no, it doesn't say. And if you're not my witnesses, he doesn't say I'll go and find somebody else. He doesn't say I won't be a god to you. Ani kel elecha. It says Ani kel, I am not God.
The thing is that we.
So the answer, Peter,
he doesn't. He says.
Let me just finish the one line, Peter. When God says, if you reject me, then I don't have a relationship with you, and I'm going to give up on relationship. I have no relationship with the world. That's the implication of the Midrash, Peter. That's what you're fighting, because you're saying, but how can it be? God could do other things. God is great. But this Midrash says, no, we have that power. That brings us to God's level. That makes us equal.
Yes, but if God rejects the relationship with us, then it is exactly as the Midrash says. And then what happens thereafter is not anything to do with us.
But God has promised never to break the relationship. God is stuck with us. God said he'll never break it. That's what Sacks says. Every relationship is a risk. In your interpretation, there's no risk, Peter. I'll try it with you. If you don't, I'll go somewhere else. Makes no difference to me. I'm still God. I'm still in the earth. There's no risk in your image.
But the Midrash is implying...
I think you're resisting the risk. Where's the risk in your relationship?
Can I say something?
The Midrash is implying there is a risk.
Yes.
Can I just say something about that?
Yeah.
But Hashem made us in his image. He also chose us to give the Bible, the Torah to. And therefore, we, in a sense, we're not equal, but at least we were chosen to be part of his way, a part of him.
I agree with you, but you know what? God chose us, but we chose God. I've got a whole bunch of midrashim.
Yes, well, we agree.
There's some amazing midrashim that say that God was trying to build the earth, and he's digging. It gives a metaphor of a king who wants to build a palace, and the palace is it's a marsh, and he's digging down until he finds a stone, a hard surface that he can put the foundation to build the palace. And the midrash says that's like God. God wanted to talk to the world, but he couldn't find any connection. He built down until eventually he found a stone. And that stone was, he knew that one day there'd be a man called Abraham who would know him. And once he knew there'd be an Abraham one day, then he built the world. Implication, yes, God chose us, but we chose God equally. Peter is right to find it difficult. And there's a whole bunch of midrashim on this, but the daring, shocking idea truly is that it is equal. And people go, but how can that be? We're not physical. But the midrashim push further and further down that path. They want it to be equal. They compare. Now, in the ancient, what Rabbi Sacks might have mentioned to you on these walks in the park, is that they're called suzerain mandates, relationships. That in the ancient world, that there were the idea of a king making a covenant with a people and stuff of obligations, and the Torah in chapter 20 writes it in that kind of way. It uses ancient language from the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians at the time. But the radical idea was that it was an equal. It was a meeting of equals, right? And both sides of obligations, right? And both sides are not allowed to leave those obligations. Any more final comments, or I think we should have. We're coming to our 45 minutes. Okay, anybody else?
Hi, thank you.
Yes.
It's Tali here. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. For me, I think I understand the concept of equality, I understand the concept of meaning. I just think the Midrash is written from the perspective of humanity, humanity endeavoring to raise themselves to that equality and then giving themselves the responsibility of living up to it. So it's to give us meaning in life. The Midrash is just, human.
I agree with you and that's why if I it's so hard when you're not in the room, because I could point out. Remember that bit that I said? I look up my eyes to God. And when the Midrash translates, it says, Il male ani, if not I, lo hayiti, if not for I would not be in the heavens. Now that first I means humans, and the second I means God. But why does it write it in that way? Because Tali, I think as the Midrash writer gets more confident, it starts playing with perspective. And we actually can identify with the image of God inside us. So if I am not I, then God is not God. So human consciousness.
The Midrash is written by humans.
I know, but Maimonides believed that we are in the image of God, and therefore when we raise our consciousness, we are directly in touch with God. And the more aware we are, the more we're connected to God. And when we close our minds, we disconnect from God. When we're truly connected with them, then there's no difference between us and God in terms of our relationship. We become one. And that's what it means to do a mitzvah with kavanah. I'm doing it not because of my own ego. I'm not doing it because I'm trying to make people happy. I'm doing it, God commanded me. I'm in perfect sync with God. You know what it's like watching? You know those great videos of these dancers who are in perfect sync without looking at each other. And how do they do it? They sense each other. They're in symbiosis. That's what happens with kavanah. We don't have to look at God. We know we're doing exactly the same. And so in that sense, it becomes not just our point of view, but actually God's. That's the daring idea of the Midrash when it says, Imale ani. Now, these ideas are really radical. You're going, really? Really? But if you read the Midrash slowly, and I'll send it to you, and I want you to ponder it, the writer is really pushing on these ideas. Anyway, I'm glad to have shown you one interesting Midrash to think about and challenge. I hope you have a wonderful time at Mount Sinai, right? When you daven your Amida on Shabbat, put your feet together and stretch up, kivyachol, as if you're reaching to heavens. And I'll see you at Sinai is all I can say. I'll see you at Sinai.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Shabbat.
So
Thank you.
just a word of thanks.
Shabbat shalom.
Rafi, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone. Most interesting, illuminating. Please do send me the sources and I will circulate
you right now, and you can send it out. I'll just change the
I'll send them out. Thank you very much for joining us, and do come again sometime. And thank you everyone. The next bit, Kabbalah Shabbat online at 4 o'clock for those who are interested. That's 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom to you all.
Shabbat shalom.
You will. Bye-bye.
Excellent.
Hi.